Dude, never did it.
5 stars. Okay. Well, I felt like I had to because I gave the first one 5 stars.
I gave the first one 4.5, so I'm comfortable giving the second one 5 stars because it is a little bit better. But the 1984 version is not 5 stars.
I don't know about that. All right. Well, here. Well, let's get into it. Welcome back to Never Did It. I'm Brad Garoon, and I'm here with Jake Ziegler. On Never Did It, we usually look back at the last 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. But today we're doing something special because Dune is the biggest movie of the year, and it's going to probably stay that way, which is a bit of an indictment on what 2024 will be. But Dune rules, so that's okay. We're going to be talking about the history of Dune in film. We're going to talk about Jodorowsky's Dune. We're going to talk about David Lynch's Dune. We're going to talk about both of Denis Villeneuve's Dunes. Let's start by talking about Jodorowsky's Dune because, holy crap, what a weird guy.
The great Dune that never was.
If you haven't seen this, turn this off and hop on HBO Max, and it's there. If you're listening to this close to when we recorded this podcast, if not, it's pretty easy to find this documentary about, as Jake said, the Dune that never was. Unless you're Nicholas Winding Refn, in which case it was the Dune that absolutely was, and he's the only person in the world who's seen it, because he thinks reading books is the same as seeing a movie. What a doofus.
We'll talk about him more in a minute, I'm sure.
You saw this movie when it came out, right?
I did, yeah. I actually saw it when it came out because I'm obsessive about the Oscars, and this documentary was shortlisted for the Best Documentary Oscar. It didn't end up getting nominated, but since it was shortlisted, I did watch it, and honestly, I had never even seen the David Lynch Dune at that time, so it was a very interesting experience. It was like my first intro to the Dune story basically at all. Even then I found it really interesting, and yeah, Jodorowsky's a really interesting character just in and of himself. Just listening to him, how he would have put the movie together and what he would have done with it and who he would have cast and everything. It's yeah, I mean, at 90 minutes it almost even felt a little short. Even there's probably more they could have explored even a little bit deeper, but it's a really interesting movie about the making of a movie that unfortunately didn't get to make.
So Jodorowsky is an interesting guy himself. He was born in Chile. His parents were Ukrainian Jewish immigrants to South America. And he's a lunatic. You said who he would have cast in his movie, but he did cast several people in this movie. Yeah. And with few exceptions, they were bizarre casting choices, although some that have reverberated through the years and through different versions of Dune. Like he wanted Mick Jagger to play the Na Baron, Feyd-Rautha. Because he wanted Mick Jagger to play Feyd-Rautha, later David Lynch also cast a rock star in Sting to play Feyd-Rautha. And then Denis Villeneuve wanted someone who reminded him of Mick Jagger. And so he got Austin Butler, who had played Elvis previously and also just sort of reminded him of a rock star. So it's cool how certain things go through every iteration. Mm-hmm. But then he also cast like Salvador Dali as the emperor. And we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, I love that.
And like David Carradine as Leto is a normal choice. Like that's a real actor.
Mm-hmm.
And he cast, of course, because he's a lunatic, he casts his son as as Paul. Yeah, the documentary is very cool in that you see his designs, you see that he started working with H.R. Geiger, and he kind of gave Geiger his start in the movie industry, which is very cool. And also the Geiger stuff is very evident in Villeneuve's Dune.
Well, just the fact that he had so much of it mapped out, I think is insane that they didn't get to make it because it wasn't, I mean, the book is gigantic. I mean, it's a thick book. I mean, they've got basically every scene storyboarded and drawn and dialogue and just scene by scene. It's not just an overview of the movie. It's not just like Cliff's Notes version of it. I mean, it's the entire movie. I mean, Nicholas Winding Refn, of course, thinks he's seen the whole thing because he read through this entire book. I mean, he hasn't. That's a stupid thing to say, and he comes off really stupid. But I mean, it is really impressive how much, and I wonder, like, how many filmmakers actually go through and have that much preparation before they do any movie, let alone something that was this big. I mean, Jodorowsky's he is a very strange guy, and his thought on this movie was that it was going to be more than a movie. It was going to be like the messiah of movies. He had such grand aspirations for this thing, and just to hear him talk about it and talk it up like that, and to try to make it into something so big and so epic. And it was going to be before Star Wars even, which is another interesting thing to think about. Like if this had come out before Star Wars, would, this have been like the great science fiction movie that like changed every young person who turned into who was young at that time, who turned into a filmmaker, was influenced by Star Wars? Would it have been Dune instead? I mean, probably.
Star Wars pulled from Dune. There's no way around it. I mean,
Certainly.
George Lucas absolutely we know this. He took people from this crew to help make his movie. He has almost certainly read that book. It's about a boy from a sand planet who saves the galaxy by fighting his family. So it's the same story. It's not the same story, but it's a similar story, a chosen one. I mean, that stuff came later. To your question, what would Star Wars have looked like? How much more would have Lucas had to have deviated from what he did, because he would have needed to make it quite a bit different from Dune. So it's funny because you asked, why didn't they do it? In a way I understand, and in a way I totally don't. In the way that I understand is the way that I understand why stuff like this doesn't get made now, although a giant Dune movie did just get made. But with properties that have no previous real cultural cachet, people aren't going to take a huge financial risk on something like that, which is what happened to this movie. They decided with Jodorowsky, who had only made really weird movies up to this point, which I'm dying to see. I've never seen El Topo. I've never seen Holy Mountain. Have you seen them?
No, I haven't seen them either.
When we get through our 100 years, 100 movies, 200 movies, we got to find a way to sneak this in.
Yeah, agree.
I'm dying to watch them, especially because 1970 in my letterbox list it's very scarce. So I need to start adding movies to 1970, and that's when El Topo came out.
Perfect.
Yes, you wonder. So in that regard, I understand. I also understand it because they told us that's what happened. But where I don't understand it is it's not like 60s and 70s sci-fi was normal. It was all weird. 2001: A Space Odyssey was very strange. Now granted, this was happening in the communist world and not the West, but like Solaris is so strange.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a real bummer that this didn't get to happen. On the other hand, it gives us something to talk about now. I'm so glad that we've touched on Nicholas Winding Refn, because I had texted you after I watched it. I'm dying for you to tell me who comes off worst in this movie. And the first thing you texted me back, and I know you weren't actually responding to that question because it was a couple days later, but you responded back about how Jodorowsky used some salty language to talk about what he had done to Frank Herbert's novel when he changed the ending.
Yeah.
So I thought it was Jodorowsky's language that had caught your attention, and you thought that I was going to say that he had come off worse. But of course, no. I mean, he comes off like a lunatic, but not like a bad person. But of course was Nicholas Winding Refn, who has tried to insert himself into the story of Dune.
Yeah, like he's somehow special, or he's seen the movie. Like, no, you haven't, man. It doesn't exist,
Yeah, so it's stuff like this. We talked about this too off the air. I've only seen Drive. I really like Drive. I know you like it less, but you've seen other Nicholas Winding Refn movies, and I didn't understand, because I like Drive, why those movies have a bad reputation. Not a bad reputation, but like are not loved, and and they're bad.
Yeah, Neon Demon is the only other one that I've seen, and it was so just painfully slow, and it was just awful, and the story makes no sense, and it doesn't go anywhere, and it's one of those, it's just really pretentious, and like, look at how artsy it is, sort of thing, really. And those are the only two I've heard. Well, what's the one with Tom Hardy? His early one, Bronson, I believe is his. That's supposed to be very good, and I would definitely give that a try, because I do like Tom Hardy. Yeah, just of the two I've seen, I thought Drive is crazy overrated. Just a lot of, and I love Ryan Gosling and Carey Mulligan too, but like if I wanted to watch them stare at each other for 2 hours, I mean, I don't need a whole movie for that.
But it's got Albert Brooks as the villain.
I do love Albert Brooks in it. He is a definite highlight. I like Albert Brooks in it, and I like Bryan Cranston in it. I just think most of the story is like the story doesn't do anything for me.
Right, and their scene together is one of the most harrowing scenes of the last 20 years. It's incredible. So I quite like Drive, and also Christina Hendricks. I will watch anything with Christina Hendricks.
Well, I want to say something about Dolly before we move on.
Oh, I'm not ready to move on yet. Keep going.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Yeah, because Dolly, what I love about casting Dolly is that, of course, a guy who is not primarily an actor decides that he wants to be the highest paid actor just for being in this movie, which I think is hilarious. So they come up with a way to do this where, Dolly, they wanted to cast him as like the Grand Emperor role, and they decide that they're going to pay him was $100,000 for each minute of screen time, and then in order to keep his screen time down, they're going to have the character, the Emperor, be so afraid of being assassinated that they're going to have like a robot stand in for him for most of the scenes. So he's going to be in like 3 minutes of the movie, 5 max, and get paid $100,000 per minute, which $100,000 a minute, yeah, that's the highest paid actor going. So yep, you did it, Dolly. Good job.
Yep. Yeah, right. He's the highest rate of any actor ever.
Highest rate.
But only through the robot thing killed me. I also loved the way that Dolly's girlfriend told Jodorowsky, he's going to ruin your movie.
There were no illusions for her. She knew what she was into.
The last thing I want to say about it is, as much as we're lamenting that we never got to see this movie, we're movie guys. We like seeing any movie. This movie would have been bad. Now, it might have been good in a, wow, what a weird artifact. As everyone knows by now, I'm watching all of Walter Matthau's movies.
Are you?
And recently I came across a movie he's in only for a few minutes, called Candy. And Candy is kind of like a alternate universe version of Barbarella, where Barbarella is Jane Fonda looking sexy and having sex a lot in outer space. And this is, I forget the girl's name. She was very young. She was like barely 18 when this movie came out, but it was her on Earth. And there's a suggestion at the beginning of the movie that she's came from Earth as an alien, and all the men in her life are trying to have sex with her. And it is a sort of like psychedelic, crazy things are happening. The cast is Walter Matthau, Ringo Starr, Richard Burton, James Coburn.
Oscar winner James Coburn.
Didn't they give it to him sort of just because it's like it's time to give James Coburn an Oscar?
He won it in he won it in for a 1998 film called Affliction with Nick Nolte.
Right.
And you know what James Coburn said about that too? He says, "I can act. It's not often that I've been asked, but I can."
Well, he's definitely not asked in Candy.
Yeah.
Marlon Brando, I don't know if I mentioned that, he's in it.
Wow.
John Huston has a very short, very small role in it. And then Ringo Starr, and the movie starts out with like Ringo Starr getting all charged up because of something Richard Burton says to him, and he more or less sexually assaults Candy, the titular Candy. And the most of the movie is everyone trying to have sex with Candy. Why did I bring this up? Because the vibe is sort of similar, where it's just like crazy stuff happening, and it's not a good movie, but I'm really glad I watched it because it's just so strange. And I have a feeling that Jodorowsky's Dune would have fallen into the same territory. Though the ending he described reminded me a lot of, as far as modern things go, Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I'm in the vast minority. I also despise. I think it is nonsense. Like the way you describe Nicholas Winding Refn movies is the way I describe Neon Genesis Evangelion movies. I mostly think that Hideaki Anno stuff, including Shin Godzilla, which people went crazy for a few years ago, is just boring up its own butt nonsense. So, and I think this probably would have fallen into the same thing because that's what his alternate ending sort of sounded like.
Absolutely.
But we're not going to spoil what he said what his ending would have been, where he sexually assaults Frank Herbert's memory.
Yes.
We'll let you watch the documentary for yourself. And that brings us to David Lynch's Dune. What's your relation? We talked about Mulholland Drive, but what's your relationship in general with Lynch?
It's kind of hit and miss because Mulholland Drive I really love, and I have very fond memories of seeing it. I was living in Kalamazoo at the time, and I had to drive over. Took about a half-hour drive over to Battle Creek to see it. It was me and one other guy in the theater for it, and then when it was over, we kind of looked at each other like, okay, like we kind of both knew it was like this is pretty weird. But yeah, I've liked some of his movies a lot. It's another high on my list of never did it though is Blue Velvet, which I know is divisive. There's there's a lot of love and hate it people on that one, but I've actually never seen it. I've never seen The Elephant Man either. So yeah, I know it's kind of weird, but love Mulholland Drive. I love The Straight Story. I think Inland Empire was one of the worst things I've ever seen. Right. I saw it at the theater, and if I wasn't with other people, I might have walked out. It's the closest I've ever come to leaving a movie. I thought Lost Highway was really hard to get through. Didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, so I'm pretty hit and miss with him. But when he hits, I mean I love him. Plus I just love him personally. Yeah. Like I could listen to him talk about anything. He's great. He's a gift himself. So
totally. I'm really sad he's not on YouTube anymore. He used to do. I know. It's such a bummer. And on Fridays I often, to my wife's chagrin, tell her that it's Friday once again. I love it. You didn't mention Wild at Heart or Twin Peaks.
Also, have never seen either of those.
Oh, okay.
I have a lot of blind spots there. I should go through it like you did. I should go through and do the whole.
Yeah, I did the whole thing last year. Or maybe 2 years ago now. It's funny you said some people love Blue Velvet and some people hate it. I don't think there's a lot of people who hate it, but I'm just like soft on it. I think it's good. I'm glad I've seen it because it helped me to spot things like there's this old Elvis movie called King Creole, which also features Walter Matthau, and it's very similar to Blue Velvet. And I'm positive that Lynch has seen it because the stories are so similar. Yeah, you got to see Twin Peaks, man. I mean, yeah. It's there's a lot of it. There's like at this point I think 40 some hours of it, but it's worth checking out. And the movie. Whew, that movie, the Fire Walk with Me, that's a bummer. So what did you think of David Lynch's Dune, the movie the thing that he's made that he despises the most?
He does despise it, yeah. And so does Jodorowsky, by the way. He said it was a bad movie.
Yeah, but it was a bad movie that made him feel good because he figured no one can do it.
You're right. Well, and also too, I will say Jodorowsky, he was when he heard that Lynch was making it, he was like, oh, okay, this is one guy who could make it correctly and who could make it good. So he actually he didn't have any hate for Lynch. He wasn't like upset about it, but then he did see it was like, oh man, this movie's bad. And then he was happy that that the movie couldn't make it good without him. And this was another one I hadn't seen until very recently, actually a local theater in Harbor Springs. Just had it for a couple of days. So it was like a special event screening.
It was happening everywhere. It came back to in New York also.
Oh, good, good. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was everywhere. And we got in on that, and I thought it was fun. I mean, it's kind of cheesy '80s schlocky sci-fi, but it's good fun. I mean, the effects don't age very well, but I like Kyle MacLachlan in it. I think he's good. It's fun to see Sting all jacked and like fighting. I'm a 10 Summoner's Tale type of Sting. I'm thinking if I ever lose my faith in you type of Sting, then I'm seeing him all like ripped and fighting and stuff like that's kind of cool. And I liked it. It's not great by any means, but I do think it's enjoyable.
It's funny that it's seeing kind of a reclamation on Twitter right now because it's
And
so strange. Although it's interesting that it came out and it kind of feels like a Flash Gordon ripoff when Flash Gordon was very clearly a ripoff of what Jodorowsky's Dune would have been.
yeah.
But there's there's some stuff in it that just straight up doesn't work. Like the pacing doesn't work. Like you said, the effects are very bad. The scene where Paul fights Gurney in the beginning and the shields go on and they're
Oh my
just
gosh,
blocks.
terrible.
But there are some things that work really well. Just sort of like the costumes are really interesting. The way that the Harkonnens are these just sort of boil covered gingers is
Mhm.
interesting take on them, different than what Villeneuve and Jodorowsky did. And the way he did Paul's little sister Alia is, I think,
Mhm.
one, more towards what the book did, and two, just like weird and creepy and different. Spoilers for Lynch's Dune. Something you
Mhm.
don't usually see is a demonic baby running around and talking and killing her
Yeah,
grandfather.
right.
But yeah, it's cool. It's interesting. It's fun. It's a shame that he has so thoroughly disowned it, but I get it. It's
Mhm.
not the movie he wanted to make. But I think it's fun, and it is the beginning of Kyle MacLachlan's career.
Mhm. Yeah, so I didn't realize that was his like very first role.
Yeah, he did a good job.
He did. Yeah.
Hard to know how different a job Jodorowsky's son would have done, but that was to that date, both the best and worst version
Yeah.
of Atreides. I've never seen the TV miniseries, and I don't know anything about it.
Oh, I didn't even know there was one.
Yeah. So we won't be talking about that. Let's jump right into it's the pandemic. It's 2021, and Denis Villeneuve releases Dune, and then to some people's surprise, Part One. What did you think when you first saw Dune Part One?
Loved it a lot right off the bat. It was a little disappointing because it debuted in theaters and on HBO Max at the same time. So I remember, and I can't remember what we were doing this weekend, but we weren't married yet, but my wife and I ended up watching it at the same time, just in separate locations, but we were watching it together because we were going to be doing something that weekend where we couldn't go see it or we couldn't watch it together, but we wanted to watch it. We didn't want to wait, because we were both really excited about it. But I really, really liked this movie. I liked Villeneuve, since the very first movie of his I saw before I knew who he was. I saw Ansandi before I, knew that who he was, and then I've liked all of his movies since then, and I thought this one was really cool. I thought Timothy Chalamet was really good in the part. I mean, everybody is really good. I mean, you just look up and down that cast. I mean, you've got people like Josh Brolin and Rebecca Ferguson. You've got Dave Bautista, who I feel like we haven't mentioned on the podcast in a while lately, and we should probably start doing that a little more often.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of my four pillars of movie fandom. It's Dave Bautista, Walter Matthau, Peter Ustinov, and then a rotating cast.
Right. Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, it looks amazing. One of the movies where you can tell, I mean, there's a lot of movies, Marvel, number one, but then there's a lot of other movies where special effects wise, you can tell like they didn't put all the time in to make it look really good and make it look, really interesting. Dune does that. And I know we talked about this a little bit when we did our Lawrence of Arabia a couple of weeks ago. It's got these awesome, like desert sequences, and they're shot really great, and like just every part of the movie looks good. Every location looks cool. Everything is interesting about it. All the villains are interesting, and all the the problems in it are interesting. There's like there's political strife, there's family struggles, and it's just an awesome movie, and it leads into the second one really well, but still being like it stands on its own very well too, where it doesn't feel as much like half a movie as even like I love the Spider-Man movies, the Spider-Verse ones, but like that second one definitely feels like half a movie. Whereas like Dune 1 and even Dune 2, I think both feel like individual movies, even though they're also part of a bigger whole.
I totally agree with you. When I first saw Dune 1 sitting I was at the time living I got a great COVID deal on a high-rise studio in Jersey City. I was slowly making my way out of Manhattan to move to Jersey City. And I'm sitting in this high-rise studio, and because it's so high up and the windows are so big, the sun is just like pouring in. I can't get a real like movie theater vibe going, and I was distracted watching it. It felt long. And then when it ended, and it does have a definitive ending, but at the time it ended in a way that didn't feel completely satisfactory to me. I was very frustrated with it. And I think part of me was like, yeah, it's good, but it's Villeneuve. I feel the same as you. He's probably my favorite director right now. And the same as you, I started watching his movies before I knew who he was. I didn't watch Ansandi until more recently, but when I saw Sicario, that I'm like that was just a pulse pounding thing, and I was I remember at the time thinking, after seeing Sicario and then Hell or High Water, I was like, oh, it's just Taylor Sheridan is a great writer.
Mm-hmm.
I've now watched some Yellowstone and realized that he can get very boring.
Yeah, dude, you should ask my wife all about Yellowstone. She tried
Yeah.
really hard.
And we did. We first episode when we gave up. I guess we didn't try really hard. We just
Yeah.
tried a little bit. So I was just like, oh yeah, Taylor Sheridan's the man. He directed Wind River. Got to check that out. Still haven't, because I started watching more Villeneuve movies. Arrival blew my brain out. Blade
Amazing.
Runner 2049 blew my brain out. And then going back and watching Prisoners. And then you and I had like a movie, like a remote movie night where we both just watched Enemy.
Which is great.
That's one of my favorite movies now. So yeah, when I watched Dune 1, I was like, it's good, but it's missing something. And what it was missing was my full attention, because we went and saw it in the theater when it came back to theaters a couple months ago, and I had a completely different experience of it. This is a full narrative, and now I even appreciate it more having seen the second one, because I've seen people complain like, oh, the full narrative, that he starts being very idealistic and then at the end he learns to kill. That's his journey. Yeah, it is. And once you've seen Dune 2, you understand why that's important. In that way, I guess you could say it's not a full movie, but what I would say is it absolutely is, because that final scene between him and Jamis, I think the character's name is.
Yeah.
That scene is really intense and really great and does feel like the end of the movie, I think, completely. And then what makes it great is once you've seen 2, and you go back and watch 1, you're like, oh my God, that was really building towards something.
Yeah.
We need to, and we'll come back and do this soon, but I know you still have to watch his first 3 movies, Villeneuve's first 3 movies.
Mm-hmm.
I did that last week, and I'm so stoked to talk to you about them. They're not all great, but I'm really excited to talk about all of them, especially Maelstrom. But yeah, Dune 1, it bumped it up a full star rating watching it in the theater. I think Dune 2 will play in theaters for at least a couple months. I just have to highly recommend people see this in theaters. Like, don't wait till it comes home. The fact that like the music made my seat shake was such an important part of it.
Oh, the Hans Zimmer scores in both of them is just, I mean, it's just perfect. I mean, he's the right guy to do, the right guy for it.
With one exception, in both movies, and it might be because of like the way people have made fun of things like Dune and Dune in the intervening years, whenever that part came on that went, I just laughed every time. I was like, it's too in the culture. It's too made fun of at this point.
That's fair.
But the music is incredible. I wish more characters had their own like themes, like their own musical themes.
Yeah.
That's all that's missing from the score for me.
It's an Oscar-winning score, and this movie, the first Dune, cleaned up actually at the Oscars. This was a big one. I don't know if you're ready for me to talk about it yet. If we
let's just talk about it now, because no other Dune movie has gotten.
And we're actually recording this on Oscar Sunday, so it's very relevant. But the Dune the first. Well, actually, if we're going all the way back, Dune the first, the Lynch movie, actually was nominated for 1 Oscar. It was up for Best Sound, which it did not win. It lost to Amadeus, which was the Best Picture that year. So like, no shame in losing to Amadeus, which is also a great movie.
Yeah, and inspired part of a Simpsons song, which is important.
Rock Me Amadeus, yeah. Dr. Zaius, yeah. Which we talked about in one of our earlier episodes. So I'll come back around.
Yep.
But anyway, the Dune the first Villeneuve was up for 10
Wow.
10 Oscars, which is a pretty high total. It was up for some of the high level ones. It was up for Best Picture. First two, the ones that it did not win. Lost Best Picture, lost Best Makeup, Costumes, and Adapted Screenplay. But then it won for Best Sound, Visual Effects, Production Design, Score, Film Editing, and Cinematography. I mean, 6 is a really high total now. Like, back in the day, even when like we were younger, there would be frequent sweeps, like Lord of the Rings, Return of the King won 11, even like Slumdog Millionaire won 8. A lot of movies would like sweep those, and it's not as common anymore. Like, they tend to spread the awards out a little bit more now, where like sometimes like the top winners are like, they win like 3 or 4 or something. 6 is a lot. So I mean, this is was a pretty well regarded within the industry. People really have loved this movie, and I'm just curious to see, because I know Dune 2 was supposed to have come out, last October. So it would have been really interesting to see how Dune 2 would have done at this year's Oscars, against like Oppenheimer and Barbie and the big movies of this year, and how it would have affected the race. And curious to see how it does, when we get to the end of this year. I mean, I think it's obviously it's not going to be forgotten. It's not the kind of movie that won't last until the end of the year. So I'm real curious to see if and you'll notice one thing that didn't happen with Dune the first. You got 10 nominations for the movie and no nomination for director or any acting awards. Yeah, not for Chalamet or any of the supporting characters or anything. Yeah.
I think Dune 2, okay, so the expressed reason for Dune 2's delay is the writer's strike and the actor strike. More the actor strike, because they wanted the actors out there promoting the movie. Okay, I think it's probably part of the reason that this giant movie got delayed is it's going to have 2024 much more to itself than it would have. 2023 is We've talked about this. We talked about this on our Oscar episode. It's one of the strongest Oscar years in recent memory, maybe since 2007. Like it's really, really strong.
Yep.
2024, just looking at what's going to come out, there's some interesting stuff this year. It does not look as promising as 2023 was. I think Dune's going to clean up, and I think Chalamet is going to be a big part of that this year.
He is so good in this second one.
Incredible. And I really hope that Javier Bardem is a big part of the Oscar campaign in the second one, because for people who say that like Nolan films and Villeneuve films are humorless, I was dying with almost everything that Bardem said. He was so funny, and he was funny while not feeling like he was in a different movie. It was very much, well, I guess we're talking about Dune 2 now. It was very much in line with the vibe of the movie, but he is like becoming, okay, spoilers start now. He's becoming a fanatic. He's becoming a total zealot for Paul. And in doing so, he's becoming like a bit of a grifter and just saying crazy things as the movie goes on. It's very, very funny. I want to call my wife in here real quick because she had a very funny take on this, and this happened in Dune 1 also, but it happened very prominently in Dune 2, where the what are they called? Fedaykin? The fighters, the Fremen fighters.
Fremen. Yeah.
Well, no, they're all Fremen, but the fighters are called like the Fedaykin or something.
Oh, right.
They hide under the sand and breathe using reeds. And she had a very funny take that I'm not sure. I don't know if you'll appreciate. Annie, can you come in here? It's gonna be better if she explains it. Can you give us your reeds take?
So I'm just going to apologize for this. First of all, Jake, I know that you really dislike this movie, and this is like for no one except me and maybe my best friend. So anyway, when the fighters, like the Fremen fighters, are under the sand and they have those, what are they, like straws?
They're reeds. Yeah.
They're reeds. They're coming up. It reminded me of that scene in Mamma Mia when all of the bachelor, like the guys, are in the water and they're like descending on the land, and they like suddenly emerge to Abba, and there is nothing more that I want than a mashup of Mamma Mia and Dune, where the fighters come up and it's like, don't go wasting your emotions. It's for no one but me, but I love it.
Thank you.
Maybe in Dune 3.
Save all your love. It's a good song. The other funny moment that came out of the movie was, have you seen, I know you don't really watch trailers, but have you, in going to see movies, seen the trailer for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes?
Yes, I have seen that.
So there's a line in it where the main ape is like, in my dreams, I see everything. And then this orangutan goes, that is not everything. And there's a scene in Dune 2 where Paul's coming to the realization that he has to go south. And he learns that in order to see the future, he has to see the past. And to see the past, he needs to drink the worm juice. And then he will see everything. And Annie and I looked at each other and whispered, that is not everything. And that's how I know we are in a good marriage.
Agree. 100%.
But yeah, so that's all. Okay, so that's the comedy stuff. And Bardem is the king of the comedy stuff.
He's great in this. I mean, man, I started thinking about that cast. I was like, and again, I'm in total Oscar mode, because again, today is the Oscars. But like, I'm looking up and down that cast. I'm like, okay, Chalamet, Oscar nominee. Brolin's an Oscar nominee. Bardem's multiple Oscar nominee, and he's won one. Florence Pugh is an Oscar nominee. Charlotte Rampling's in that movie. She's an Oscar nominee. Probably forgetting even a couple, but I mean, there's just, the cast is just so unbelievably talented, and every, like in every combination of them, there's like chemistry between them too. Like all the individual scenes, and no matter like who's in, Austin Butler, of course, was just a recent nominee, and I thought was really good in this too. His scenes with Bautista, I thought were just great. And Stellan Skarsgård has never been nominated, which is a crock. But he's great in this, and like he looks great. And I love all the actors in this. I mean, I think Villeneuve's gotten to this point too, where I think where actors are like wanting to work with him, whereas to the point where people are like, I think Zendaya said too, it's like if he calls, like I'm in, he's that guy now.
Yeah, he's like an actor whisperer. Bautista has come out and said that he single-handedly made Bautista a better actor by helping him with his confidence and making him believe in himself and saying, you're good. You need to just stop being so restrained. Do what you want to do. And I think some people are going to bump up against Bautista's performance in this movie because there is not a line that he says that isn't a guttural scream.
Right.
But that's who Rabban Harkonnen is. I think he's terrific. I also loved his scene with Austin Butler. I thought it was crazy that Austin Butler was able to completely clone Stellan Skarsgård's voice. Did you know he didn't tell Stellan Skarsgård he was going to do it?
Yeah, I just read that recently. Yeah,
That's insane. That's a crazy move.
That's a Bradley Cooper move right there.
Yep, he did a wonderful job, and he's in the movie less than he was in Elvis. But I wrote in my Letterboxd review, I wonder if Austin Butler was walking around sounding like Stellan Skarsgård while he filmed this movie.
Probably.
He's wonderful, so creepy, so made me uncomfortable every time he was on screen.
Absolutely.
You texted me that there was a spoiler that you read about someone being in the movie. So my two guesses are Lea Seydoux or Anya Taylor-Joy.
Yeah.
It was Anya Taylor-Joy.
Anya Taylor-Joy, yep.
That's a shame, although she's only in it for a second.
Yeah, it really didn't ruin anything. It was just the principle of like it was a week before the movie came out. Anya Taylor-Joy on her surprise appearance in Dune, like not much of a surprise now, you know, like thanks a lot. But yeah, again, totally didn't ruin the movie, and she's in it for like 5 seconds, if that. But yeah, it's just the principle of it. Like it's the same thing when Eternals came out, like a week before the movie. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, Harry Styles is in the post-credit scene, like which has amounted to exactly nothing, and it mattered not at all because that movie was bad. But and it was just the principle of it. Like you can't even wait until like maybe a week after the movie comes out rather than like the week before. I mean, at least give us a day or two.
Yeah, happened to me with Shang-Chi. I was listening to a podcast. Now, granted, this wasn't like the movie spoiling it, but I was listening to a podcast the day before opening day, and someone who was a guest on this podcast was like, yeah, I was at the red carpet and I saw Ben Kingsley. And I was like, why would you say it? Why would you say it? That's the best part of that movie that you just
by far, yeah. And I like that movie, but Ben Kingsley is still the best part of it.
Yeah. I'm actually afraid to watch Shang-Chi again because I really liked it a lot in theaters. And I just have this feeling it doesn't hold up. Like I have a feeling I was still like full Marvel brain at the time, and I know for sure the third act is bad, but I really liked the first hour of that movie. I liked a lot. Now maybe it's still good. Maybe I'm wrong.
We'll find out when the sequel comes out.
So there isn't a lot of criticism of this movie out there to be had. There will be. It's only been 2 weeks, and some criticism of it that I'm glad I was able to read, and I read it in a group text with my friends. There was some criticism I don't agree with. Doesn't make it mean that they're wrong in the way that they felt, but where they didn't feel, or maybe even just one person didn't feel that Chalamet and Zendaya had good chemistry. I don't agree with that, but you know, your mileage may vary. But one thing that came up, and I think it's going to come up a lot because it came up a lot on Game of Thrones. And I'm sorry for those who haven't seen Game of Thrones. I'm going to spoil a little bit here, but there is a snap heel turn in the last season of Game of Thrones by a main character, and it plays a pivotal role in how the show ends. So now, major spoilers for Dune 2. This is a really sad movie. When it comes down to it, the hero becomes a bad person at the end. I saw a funny tweet that said, where can I get my hands on the juice that makes you worse?
You get it from the worms.
Worms. But Chalamet ends the movie with what is essentially a snap heel turn. Like from the time he drinks the juice that makes you worse to his big, I think, Oscar-worthy
incredible
speech, he is like maybe 10 minutes. It's very fast, especially in this. This is a huge, I don't know how long is this?
I think it was about 2 hours and 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 40 minutes, maybe.
Yes, it's a big movie.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know though, because I don't remember even looking. So like I didn't care, because some movies like I kind of have an idea of how long they are, so I can like in my head I'm kind of like, okay, we're getting to like this part of the movie, like we're getting to the home stretch now or whatever. Like I knew Driveway Dolls was like 84 minutes. I'm like, okay, we're getting towards like, but like Dune, I almost didn't want to know how long it was, because like I just want to show it to me and it'll end when it's over, sort of thing. So yeah, but it had to be like 2.5 hours.
I wish I had known how long Driveway Dolls was, because when it ended. I was like, wait, there's no more? There needs to be more.
That's it.
It's not a lot of time spent on his transformation. I had a couple friends who bumped up against that and felt that was jarring. And I think that's absolutely deliberate. And this is what I said. Okay, so he did this snap heel turn, which is jarring on purpose because it needs to make you feel uncomfortable. If we, every step of the way, understand why he's leaning more towards going south, leaning more towards taking over, leaning more towards going back on the things he said, then we're going to start sympathizing with why he's doing those things. If it happens all at once, and I'm going to keep saying major spoilers, but like every time I say it, skip ahead or maybe just leave and come back later.
After you've seen it, yeah.
Yeah, don't listen to me if you haven't seen it. The scene where he tells Florence Pugh that he's going to marry her, you need to have no idea that's coming, even though they do sort of hint at it much earlier in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to feel like it's out of nowhere, because you need to feel what Zendaya is feeling. You need to feel that change in her face where you see her stomach fall into her butt and she's gutted because she has now been publicly humiliated. That can't happen if we get like whisper, he's going to propose to the Empress. Now, they never ever say before that he's going to propose to the Empress. His mother does say, you need to stay single so that our options are open. And this is what she's talking about because she's had the worm juice. She's seen the future. And I think it's handled perfectly. I love a snap heel turn. And I think part of that is because I'm a pro wrestling fan and snap heel turns are really fun.
Well, and Dave Bautista is the king of the heel turn.
I mean, the day he turned on Rey Mysterio is like one of the greatest snap heel turns of all time.
I literally just explained it to my wife the other day. I was like, here's what makes Dave Bautista great. All right, I want to, and I told her all about it.
About the Rey Mysterio.
Yeah, but that's true. I'm gonna rip your head off. I still remember. I can't remember stuff that I watched, on the pay-per-view like a couple of weeks ago, but I remember that Dave Bautista turn.
Yeah, and he has also Dave Bautista. He is the king of the turn because he also has one of the greatest babyface turns of all time. Yep. Now, here's the difference. A babyface turn that is gradual is wonderful because this guy you've been booing, but you like, and you keep getting hints. Maybe he'll be good. Maybe he'll be good. Maybe he'll be good. There's always a chance that at the last second, he turns heel all over again.
Rips your heart out, yeah.
Rips your heart out. But when Dave Bautista, well, he was just Batista at the time, when he finally decided to turn on Triple H and beat up all of Evolution and then won the World Heavyweight Championship. I think that might have been like one of the first great moments of our friendship was like going through that whole storyline in WWE at the time.
There was a pay-per-view on that we wanted to watch, and this was the day. I mean, we could have gotten the results on the internet. We stayed off the internet because we tried to order the pay-per-view, but we couldn't get it at the 8:00 time. I don't remember what happened. Like there was something wrong that happened. We stayed off the internet for 3 full hours so that we could order the replay of the pay-per-view just so we could watch Batista's match and find out what happened.
Right. But he did not turn babyface then. It happened later. No, we were so invested. And I feel like I've been that invested in him since then. I've heard people say that Batista was a good wrestler, but not a great wrestler. And I'm like, no, you're wrong. He was in sort of like the Sid Vicious mode or Sid Justice or just Psycho Sid, whatever version of Sid you want, the wrestler. He was wrestling. He was what wrestling is. He wasn't like Will Ospreay, where every match is going to be awe-inspiring. Some of those matches are bad, but he as a character was so good. And some of his matches were incredible, like his 3 matches with Triple H, where he won the title and then defended it twice, eventually in Hell in a Cell, which is one of my favorite matches ever.
It's great. I mean, yeah, he had a bit. He has the quality where like he was like a big muscly guy, and in the history of pro wrestling, like big muscly guys were normally big shouters and were angry all the time. And Batista had a quieter, like his promos were a lot quieter, a little more cerebral. Like he was different. Like but I mean, he was good. He was a good bad guy. He was a good guy. I can see why he's made a good like kind of character actor so far.
For sure. I mean, a big part of it, I think we talked about this a while back. He's a good listener. He was paired with Ric Flair and Triple H, who are 2 of the most successful wrestlers of all time, not just because of what they could do in the ring, but because of the kind of wrestlers they were backstage, the way they were able to advocate for themselves, sometimes in pretty nasty ways. Batista, super successful in wrestling. He had great teachers. In movies, now Batista has worked with Denis Villeneuve, Rian Johnson, M. Night Shyamalan.
Sam Mendes was another one he worked with.
Sam Mendes, huge. Love Sam Mendes. I think Away We Go is like one of the most underrated, sweet movies of all time.
It is a nice movie, yeah.
Yeah. It's too bad his latest movie was supposedly not very good. I didn't see it.
Empire of Light?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not good.
To go back real quick to that scene that I glanced over a little bit, where Paul decides that he is now the leader of the Fremen and they're going to do what he wants because he's the chosen one. I love that scene so much. Well, not only is he going back on what he said he wanted, he is disrespecting the culture of the people that have helped him. He is saying he is taking control of them. Christopher Nolan called this The Empire Strikes Back. This is so much more of a depressing ending than the end of Empire Strikes Back. Luke and Leia aren't scattered to the wind. There isn't someone in danger that they have to go save. Luke Skywalker just became Darth Vader.
That's awesome.
This isn't Empire Strikes Back. If you need a direct analog, this is Revenge of the Sith. This is when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except the protagonist is still going to be Darth Vader. This is Revenge of the Sith if A New Hope started with Darth Vader as the focal point character. I cannot wait for Dune Messiah. I have no idea how long it's going to be till that comes out, but I'm really excited for it.
Also, I like that Nolan and Villeneuve are like buddies and are championing each other's work. I just think that's neat.
Yeah, it's like, well, it's not that much different than how like George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola and Steven Spielberg were all buddies.
I actually heard recently, saw Stephen Colbert was interviewing Spielberg, and he was like, you had Schindler's List and Jurassic Park, and come out in the same year. How did you do that? He's like, well, I had Jurassic Park mostly finished. I had just a couple things to do. I had to finish the final sound mix, but I had to work on Schindler's List because I had to do it right then. So I called up George Lucas and I just had him finish the final sound mixing for me.
That's
And seems like,
nuts.
oh, that was nice. You just called your friend George to do that for you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And also because he wanted to do Schindler's List, but it wasn't his movie to have, it was Martin Scorsese's. He was like, yeah, here, you have Cape Fear. And
Yeah.
I'll make Schindler's List.
Sure. Yeah.
It's great because hopefully stuff like that is happening between Nolan and Villeneuve. And so we've already ranked all of Nolan's movies. I think in a few weeks, Jake, you can watch Maelstrom August 32nd and Polytechnique, and we can do Villeneuve.
Yep.
Great.
Do you want to do star ratings for the movies? Just to throw our star ratings out there for all four of these movies?
Totally. If you want. Yeah. So I guess in a way, let's rank the Dunes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went 4 stars for Jodorowsky's Dune, 3 stars for Lynch's Dune. I originally had Dune 1 at 4 stars, and then my theater experience bumped it up to 5. And then Dune 2 was 5 stars out of the gate for me.
Yeah, fairly similar for me here too. I went 4.5 for Jodorowsky's Dune just because I really loved it. 3 stars for Lynch's Dune, 4.5 for Dune Part 1 for Villeneuve, and then 5 stars for Dune Part 2. Yeah, it's epic.
There you have it. All right. Thanks for hanging out with us on Never Did It. See you next week. If you want to know what is coming out next week, go to our Letterboxd profile. You can find me at Brad Garoon on Letterboxd. I think, Jake, you're Jake Ziegler on Letterboxd.
Yep, it's Jake_Ziegler.
And both of us have pinned to our profiles our Never Did It podcast list. You could also just search for the Never Did It podcast list. And the 2 movies that will be discussed on next week's episode are always at the top of that list.
We have a Facebook page now as well. You can check that out at facebook.com/neverdiditpodcast. I'll be posting on that with new episodes and just fun updates from time to time about what we're watching and what's coming up.
So check that out. And thank you for joining us for Never Did It. You know what? I don't want to talk about this. I was going to compare. We just talked about wrestling so much. I'm not going to talk about how battle scenes are like the Royal Rumble.
Oh,